Looks like people are starting to join in, so welcome. We'll get
Mm-hmm.
started in just a minute here. All right, I've got 101, so why don't we kick things off? Just do an audio check. Hannah and Veronica coming through loud and clear?
Yep.
Loud and clear.
All clear.
Very good. So welcome, everyone. Pleasure you could join us today. I have Veronica Utton today. She's going to be sharing some of the new workshop that Predictive Success has created around fostering a more diverse and inclusive workforce, and also talking about her personal story just a little bit. To jump right in, why don't we get started here? Veronica, could you flip over to the next slide and we'll kick things off. So just a quick background, I think most of you are familiar with who I am. So been with Predictive Success a little over 10 years now. Love working with a variety of different clients across a number of different industries. I wrote my first book last year talking about what companies can do to really attract and retain top quality talent. A big focus this year specifically, but over many years with PI, has really been about how we can be more objective in our hiring processes. And I'm excited to have Veronica with us today. She's been a PI practitioner for many years, also a facilitator and trainer for us, does great work. It's fantastic reviews, so we're excited to have her as part of the team. She's been a certified analyst since '92, also held executive HR roles at several nonprofits, including UNICEF and Heart and Stroke, and served on the board of directors and HR councils in the nonprofit sector. So I'm excited to have Veronica with us today to discuss D&I. It's a core focus for Predictive Success this year, and has been building, I think, for many years. And we're excited to have this new opportunity to share what she's come up with. Predictive Success, for those of you who aren't too familiar with us, so we're an organization that's really based on data, helping organizations get data to know more about their people, to make better people decisions, and to be more objective about hiring and really working with their workforce. Over 600 organizations work directly with Predictive Success, and indirectly over 6,000 around the world. And we're excited to continue to expand our offering into the D&I sector and really be able to share some more data-driven processes with organizations. So a few of the organizations we work with are listed here across the bottom, but it's enough about us. Let's start talking about what everyone came to hear about today. So with no further ado, I'll pass it over to Veronica to kick things off. So thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hope your Friday has been good to you so far. We wanted to start off by simply sharing the Predictive Success diversity and inclusion statement, simply to say that while it's probably a good thing for an organization to have a position on their philosophy and their stance of diversity and inclusion, you also need to pay attention to why you would post such a statement, because at the end of the day, you are going to be held account to holding fast to whatever words you state you believe in. And so this is what Predictive Success believes in. This is what it demonstrates. It's not a perfect organization, but certainly it's making strides in moving towards creating a space where individuals feel like they would belong. And in fact, I think Rob has a great story about how this came up in practice not too long ago when a client sort of held his feet to the fire and pulled up the photographs on our website and said, "But you're all white faces." And so while, yes, there are a number of white faces on the website, you don't often see those individuals who are in the background. And so the organization is certainly building its strength, understanding that it needs to also demonstrate in a very practical way what diversity and inclusion might look like. But one of the statements that struck me most poignantly was soon after the George Floyd tragedy, when all sorts of organizations were coming out with their billboard statements about, you know, where their position was and what they believed in. And I want to share this one with you because this is one of those statements that when you put it out there, the world is going to be watching and the world is going to be putting you to account to actually demonstrate what it is you say you believe in. So this is a silent video. So just give me 1 minute here to pull it up for you. And it's about 45 seconds for you to enjoy.
Is it supposed to be playing something, Veronica? It doesn't seem to be.
It's a silent video.
We just haven't seen anything change.
You're not seeing the movement of the video?
No.
Huh. Interesting. It worked quite nicely when we tested it, but so at this stage, if you're not seeing it, what I will do is certainly share a link for you to watch it. But essentially what it is saying is, you know, we believe in Black Lives Matter. If you as employees don't believe in this, then you should find another job. If you as a client don't believe in this, then we'll help you find another advertising firm. So they've been bold in their statement by stepping out and saying, you know, this is what we believe. This is why we believe it. And this is what we're doing about it, because we're not about to sit back and watch this continue to happen. So essentially, if you're looking to create a statement, if you don't already have a statement, those really are the ingredients to creating a statement that would be meaningful for your organization. Is what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And what are you doing about it? And then there's a litmus test that you're going to have to apply to it to ensure that it's actually something, a statement that's going to be believable to your stakeholders. So do your stakeholders actually experience it when they work with you, when they interact with you, when they buy your product? Does it align to your values? Is it who you are? Would people recognize you from such a statement? And are you willing to die on your sword for it? So are you able, like Wyden and Kennedy, to walk away from business if it doesn't align with who you are as an organization? So today we're going to cover off some basics. You know, what does diversity inclusion really mean? I'm going to speak to you a little bit about my own experience as a BIPOC and why it's important for you also to be paying attention to the experiences of your BIPOCs. We'll touch on exploring unconscious bias and then simply leave you with steps that you could take in order to begin to foster a more inclusive environment. So what does it really mean? I love this quote. D&I needs to be something that every single employee at the company has a stake in, because it's not just one individual's responsibility. It's the entire organization, the entire community, and globally at large. It's a responsibility that we all have to participate in. So diversity really takes a look at our differences. So our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our sexual orientation, and it understands that there are going to be those differences that come into the workplace or that are going to be in a community that you live in. The inclusion component not only recognizes that, but then it invites you to the party. It allows you to be a part of decisions that are going to affect you. It allows your voice to be raised and recognized when there are issues that concern you as an individual in the organization. And that feeling of belonging is what an individual personally experiences when they know they have been completely accepted for who they are and what they bring to the table. And I'll just share with you a story, a bit of research where individuals have been known to whiten their resumes. And this was a study that was done with Black and Asian young individuals in their 20s applying for their first jobs after graduating from college and university in the States. And essentially what they were doing was removing all traces of their race, their ethnicity, and in some instances, their gender, so that they could actually get a foot in the door to get that level playing field where they would be considered for an opportunity in, top 500 organizations in the US. And so that's what some individuals feel they need to do in order to belong, in order to believe that they will be accepted into, an organization, a space where they would work. We always like to look at the stats and recognize that diversity and inclusive work has real impact. And so when we see that 70% of organizations are going to be better positioned to capture new markets, there's evidence behind these kinds of numbers that can certainly be beneficial to your organization. So it's always important to understand the language. And for some of this language is new, for others, it's language that you've heard. But what we do when we work through this program is to set that level playing field so that when individuals are learning about this topic for the first time, they can come at it from a baseline in understanding the kinds of terms, topics, concepts that will come up from time to time. So systemic racism, and this is one, if you read the report from the RCMP not too long ago, it was shocking to hear that the chief of RCMP claimed that she didn't know what systemic racism was. Meanwhile, our tax dollars have paid out billions of dollars in damages. But systemic racism consists of policies and practices entrenched in the organization. So it's the way that your organization has been doing things. You go through a selection process of candidates in a particular way, and it's entrenched. You don't even often recognize that it's the way you do it, but it is the way you do it. And it forms the system of how you go about perhaps recruiting in your organization. Microaggression, and I will share with you an example of my own experience there, is a term that describes some level of racism that's so subtle that sometimes the individual, the victim, doesn't even recognize that it's happening. It may be an afterthought that says, did they really say that? Is that really come out of, that was her inside voice coming out kind of thing? And so it's one of those moments when you have to take a step back and actually recognize that what was said was with some level of racist indicator. Now, white privilege, again, is one of those terms that some individuals do get their back up against, but what it refers to are the advantages that are taken for granted by whites that cannot similarly be enjoyed by a BIPOC. So there are particular schools, for instance, and in particular in the States, where a person like myself would not be easily registered to go to that particular school because of its Ivy nature. Whereas there are others who are white who would have no difficulty registering to go to a particular Ivy level school. Colorism is an interesting one because it actually occurs in same ethnicities. So I'll give you the example of my Jamaican heritage. It is very common to have varying hues of chocolate in your family. And it is known that the lighter skinned individuals might have preferential treatment for front-facing jobs than the darker skinned individuals who would perhaps be in the kitchen at a hotel, for instance. So that colorism is where there is that presumed superiority of people within the same color of skin. Anti-racism, the practice of identifying, challenging, and changing value structures and behaviors that perpetuate systems. So putting in the work that helps to break down, dismantle, redefine what a system should, could, would look like. Allyship are those individuals who work closely aligned with marginalized individuals, who use their privilege in order to advocate for marginalized individuals. And I'll share my story in that regard as well. And BIPOC, one of the more recent terms, is the acronym that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Now, how does it hit your bottom line? Because that's what's most important to people in business, is why should I care? Why should I spend my time creating a program? What's it going to do for my organization? Well, morally, yes, it's the right thing to do. Beyond the moral, there are significant benefits, starting with productivity. When you bring different talents together, working towards a common goal, you're bringing different skills. And so you don't have same thinking. You have broadened thinking, you have diverse in thinking, and you have different experiences that are coming to the table. Creativity is another byproduct of a diverse and inclusive organization. So you're injecting differences in approach, different perspectives that allows for a problem to be solved in a way that might not have been thought about in the past. With employee turnover, what you're doing is you're broadening your audience. So positions may not stay vacant quite as long if you're willing to open up, broaden your horizons in terms of applications that are available to you. Certainly on the profitability side, when you are increasing your cultural diversity, and in particular when you are serving a broader level of community, you are going to increase your profitability. One example that comes to mind is Band-Aid for years made what they called a nude colored Band-Aid. Well, nude for whom? Because certainly that nude color wasn't translatable across every ethnicity. They have recently learned that they would have to offer varying shades of nude in order to expand their reach in the marketplace. And certainly, I suspect they will be seeing a lift in their profitability with the broader range of products. Certainly, company reputation is high on the scale. We know that our millennials and our Gen Z are going to be the ones to carry this D&I torch into the future. And they're the ones that are expecting their work world to resemble their community world and their school world. The millennials and the Gen Zs have grown up in a much more culturally diverse environment than us boomers and Gen X. And so when they go to an organization, they are expecting to see that range of diversity in the workplace, and they're holding organizations, and they will hold organizations accountable to that. And last but not least, when you create a space where individuals, even with their diversities, can be included and feel as though they belong, they will care more about your business. They will be engaged in the work in more deep and meaningful ways to help you build the organization and meet your goals and objectives. So the dividends that flow from creating such an organization, Qatar Airlines is one that certainly is able to speak highly of how putting in the work, 3 to 4 years of a focused effort on creating and fostering and growing diversity in their organization brought them out of the hole and into a sign of profit, where they are now able to run in more profitable levels. So those greater investments around performance is something that you're going to see over time. You're going to get better return on your sales. Again, you're reaching a broader community in the marketplace. And because you are opened up to a greater stakeholder, your product, your service, whatever it is that you're in business to do, has an opportunity to have a greater level of reach, and which then falls to better operating profit margins. You have individuals who are thinking about how you run your business, and they're going to be looking at different ways, offering you different ideas, so that you can continue to increase your diversity opportunities, whether it's with women in senior roles, whether it's expanding the demographics on your board, so that when individuals outside your organization can actually recognize themselves with those inside of your organization, then that connectivity is made. We have a poll for you just to get a better sense of where you stand in the work that you're doing on diversity and inclusiveness. So the question is, or the statement is, my organization has relevant data that clearly demonstrates we internally reflect the audience we serve. So you've got 5 options there. If you take a moment, just select your option, and we can see where people stand.
While we're doing that, I did skip the quick housekeeping at the beginning, so just wanted to make a quick comment. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat box. We will take some time at the end of the discussion today in order to field questions, and obviously always happy for follow-ups as well.
Hannah, perhaps you can pull up those results when they're ready. Wow, all right. So we're seeing that 50% of you somewhat agree that you are reflecting, that you've got the data, at least that tells you, and 50% are saying you don't. So or you disagree. So there's opportunity on both ends, I think, in terms of how you might be able to close some of those gaps. All right. And we know that this is the time, because there's no greater opportunity than now to help to reduce some of the risk that you might actually experience if you're caught short of not having your diversity and inclusive house in order, right? There's no amount of time that's worth spending in front of the Human Rights Tribunal when you've got a business to run. And so when you take the time to put your diversity and inclusive house in order, you can mitigate some of that risk. Now, just outside, just following the events in March with George Floyd, Robin Diangelo came out with a video. I won't show it, but essentially what it says, bottom line, is if you haven't listened to a story from a BIPOC, this is the time to start to listen to those stories. So there could be someone in your organization that you've worked alongside for years, but that you really don't know anything about. You don't understand what they would have experienced as a Black, as an Indigenous, as a person of color. And so I'm sharing with you a snippet of my story. And I am a descendant of Jamaican parents. My parents moved from Jamaica when in the late 50s, when most people were making that trek across. They moved to England. I was born in England. I spent the first 5 years of my life there, came to Canada and had opportunity to live in what I believe was a very privileged white neighborhood. I grew up rubbing shoulders with Blacks of Black's Camera, Lewis of Lewis Craft, King Clancy of Maple Leaf Gardens. These are the people, the kids that I went to school with. And so I had privilege in being exposed to different components and different experiences of Canadian culture that I don't believe every Black child that has come to this country has had the opportunity to experience. But grade 2, teacher tells us it's show and tell day, and they tell us to bring in any item that we choose to share with the class. And so I bring in a photograph of my 5-year-old self. And I tell my story about where I'm born and, you know, what I did in England. And at the end of my story, the teacher asks the class if they have any questions. And one boy, I will never forget his name. I won't say it just in case he's ever on the line, but I'll never forget his name. And he put up his hand and said, "But you look like a monkey." And in that moment, in that space, I experienced my first episode of white supremacy, and in school, in a place where you're supposed to be safe, in a place where a child feels they should belong. Fast forward to my days as a senior HR leader at UNICEF. Prior to that, I had held interim VP role of HR at Heart and Stroke Foundation. So in my mind, I had done it right. I had gone to school. I had, got my certification in human resources. So I thought, I'm moving along the path the way that I'm supposed to be moving along the path. And so I'm at UNICEF Canada, and we were in offices back in the day when you can be in offices. And we can all remember that just outside your office, your name would be nicely etched into the wall. So it was kind of clear that I was sitting in my office. And there was a woman that I had built a relationship over the phone and by email, because back in those days we didn't have Zoom. And so you never saw who you were talking to. You just heard voices and read email messages. And one day she was in the office attending a meeting, and I heard footsteps coming towards my office, and they stopped outside my office. She knocked on the door and she said, "Is Veronica in today?" And I turned and I said, "Is Veronica expecting you?" And she said, "Well, no, I was in the office. And I just thought, I'd come and put a name to a face. We talk all the time." And I said to her, "And what did you expect Veronica would look like?" And in that moment, she recognized that it was me. And she said, "I thought you were blonde and blue-eyed." And so that's one example of the many microaggressions. In that moment, you don't actually realize it's a racist remark, but it is. Because how could possibly be that a person of my color, of my ethnicity, of my race, be in a senior leadership role for a global organization, right? So that's how it happens. Fast forward to June of this year. I'm out for a socially distanced lunch with a friend in Burlington by the lake. And we were just talking about everything that's been going on and the heaviness of it all. And then we got onto the George Floyd conversation. And I made the comment that, it's really, it can be really exhausting just being Black. And she looked at me and she said, but I don't see your color. And I said, then you don't see me. And this is a friend of over 40 years we went to high school with. And she said, but what do you mean? And I said, when your boys borrow your vehicle and drive to wherever they go, do you give them the talk? And she said, what do you mean the talk? I said, I have a son. If I lend him my car, he's getting the keys with, and if you get stopped, put your hands on the steering wheel. Don't do any fast movements. Pull up your pants when you're walking along the street. He gets that talk when he leaves the house. And in that moment, she got it, because she had never had to give her child, her boys, that talk. Now, it hasn't all been bad. In fact, my life has been pretty good here in Canada, I have to say. I've lived a fairly privileged life, but I haven't done it on my own. These have been my allies along the way. These are the individuals who have come alongside and mentored me, and they have poured into me at times in my career that helped me to sort of elevate to the next step. Rick Gallup, he was the president and CEO at Heart and Stroke Foundation, and his claim to fame statement with me was, you're not in this for a popularity contest, you're in this to get the job done. And he allowed me to grow into that role of vice president HR at Heart and Stroke Foundation. Duncan Campbell, he was a board member, the chair of our board HR committee. And in that position of vice president human resources, I had to present my first budget to the board of directors. 33 board, as you can imagine, all male, white faces. Little Black girl has to get up and do a presentation of the HR budget, right? I didn't know anything from doing this, but Duncan Campbell, again, came alongside. He mentored me. He taught me everything that I needed to know about compensation and how to position it and make that presentation to get the approvals that would be needed. Fast forward to probably 1990, a little later than that, maybe 2005, Dave Leahy steps into my life. And if you know anything about predictive index, I am an individualist. And individualists don't work well in traditional jobs. And he could never understand how I was making it work in these traditional jobs. And I said to him one day, and I said, when you're a single mom, you'll do what you need to do to make sure your child gets what they need. So, but he was always my biggest cheerleader to sort of step out in faith and do my own thing. And 10 years ago, I did step out in faith, did my own thing, and he was right there to sort of coach me and get me going in starting up my own practice. So these were my allies. But as you can see, all more senior white individuals. And why? Because when I was coming up, there were no people that looked like me. There were no male Black mentors or female Black mentors. These were the individuals that were available to guide me and to give me the kind of lessons that I needed to learn in order to move along to the next level. So how do we deal with unconscious bias in the workplace? Because this is sort of the nemesis of diversity inclusion. It's that we all bring a level of unconscious bias into the decisions that we make and the work that we do. And these are the sort of six most popular unconscious biases that we will experience in the workplace. That conformity bias really speaks to if anybody remembers the video from when we used to do video training back in the day, the road to Abilene, you go along to get along. You're not going to ruffle any feathers. Even when you see bad behavior, you don't call it out because you don't want to be the one to ruffle any feathers. That similarity bias speaks to hiring people that look like you, that talk like you, that walk like you, that dress like you, that you don't step out of your boundaries to refer someone that isn't in your network and that doesn't actually look like you. And so you have a department or you have an organization of mini-me's, same people, because there haven't been any expansions into different and new territory. That halo bias will certainly get in the way where if you have an individual who has done it right before, you think, wow, they're going to do it right again. And so without taking a look at their true capabilities, you may be making decisions that are uninformed. The horn bias looks at quite the opposite in that, well, we know that Black youth, male youth are troublemakers, so we don't want those individuals in our organization. You're making a fairly broad statement about a demographic that is misinformed. Yes, some cause problems, but not all. Confirmation bias is oftentimes you use an approach, and particularly in the selection process, you use a line of questioning to actually confirm what you have perceived. And that may cause you to remove or to dismiss a candidate from the process. And the contrast bias is where you are comparing apples to oranges. So you would be saying, well, I want an individual that looks like A. I'm comparing them to B, when really there should be no comparison from A to B. You should be comparing against the requirements of the job and not the individual people. So unconscious bias is pretty common. Yale finds that 95% of people were impacted by these subconscious attitudes. They're implicitly there. I mentioned to you earlier around that white job applicants were found to be 74% more successful in interviews than ethnic minorities. And this is where individuals are actually, whitening their resumes to level the playing field. Okay, I think we're good there. So how do you manage it? How do you deal with it? You want to be sure that you are using data that allows you to strip away those bias indicators. And something like the predictive index that focuses strictly on the data allows you to understand the behaviors of that person and not the individual themselves. I'd love to see a day where resumes can land on an individual's desk that don't have the individual's name on them, because we know that when recruiters are having difficulty pronouncing a name that they see on a resume, they are dismissing that individual. I certainly heard from a young lady the other day. Her name was very mainstream. Her name was, I won't use her particular name, but she had a name like Julie Smith. And she applied for a position. She got a call to participate in a Zoom interview. When the recruiter, launched the interview and Julie was sitting in front of the recruiter said to her, "This is a meeting with Julie Smith. Are you Julie Smith?" And the young lady said, "Yes." And she said immediately the demeanor of the recruiter changed. Now, Julie was a Muslim girl. in her burqa. And immediately she felt that level of disapproval, because yes, she had a mainstream name, but she didn't have a mainstream appearance. So the data, when you focus specifically on it, it allows you to make selections in a bias-free way, so that we understand that individuals come with a certain level of knowledge, skills, experience, but it's really the behavioral drives, along with what we know to be the cognitive abilities that you really need to be focusing on for an individual to be able to perform their job well. Now, what can you do as leaders? I love this quote from one of my colleagues: "The behavior that we walk past is the culture we enable." So the bottom line is, we can't continue to walk past bad behavior. We have to have the courage to actually call it out. And you can do it in a constructive way. And the Deloitte LEAD framework gives you a level of construction that you can begin to work at this. So listen, ensure that you actually are giving opportunity for individuals in your organization to raise their concerns. You know, just after the George Floyd tragedy, there were some organizations that were mindful of creating spaces for their BIPOCs to actually gather and speak and share and go through that process together. And there are other organizations that didn't actually recognize that that was an important step to take. So listening is a key component to building that inclusive workplace. Engage with individuals, ask them their opinion. When is the last time you yourself sat down with a person that looks like me for lunch, just to talk, just to find out about that person? So engaging with people of different races is another step that you can take, and acknowledge that your systems are working against racialized individuals. Take a look at your systems. How do you recruit? So that it could be that you have an individual in your HR department that's responsible for drafting, equitable postings. But when the applications get to the hiring manager, there's a disconnect, and perhaps that hiring manager has not been trained in selecting and reviewing and vetting resumes with a biased-free way, with an unbiased way. And when you've gone through this process of listening, of engaging, of acknowledging, and you decide that you're going to do something, then do it. But don't bite off too much more than you can chew, because there's lots to accomplish in this world of diversity and inclusiveness. You've really got to be clear about what impact you want to have and what you can realistically achieve. And of course, in terms of promoting that, diverse mindset, it's really about ensuring that people understand the connection to your business. It's not just that it's something else added on top of what you already have in terms of a busy workload. It's incorporating and integrating what you have so that it's complementary and that it supports what it is you're going to be doing. And certainly Predictive Success offers a few options, but certainly these can be customized to suit your organization based on where you are in your own evolution of the work that you're doing. But we know that, working with senior leaders and understanding how they want to position this kind of philosophy in their organization is usually the best place to start. And I leave you with this simply to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a destination. We, in our lifetime, are not likely to see everything wrapped up nicely with a bow. This is work that has been going for many years. It will continue well past the days that we have been nicely, set away in our boxes. But the work is it's ongoing, it's continuous, it's work that you have to be willing to commit to. It's not a one and done. Don't expect that you can have a training event or offer a reading circle or anything of those kinds of natures and expect that you've ticked it off the box. This is ongoing and work that needs to be incorporated into your own metrics year over year over year.
Thank you very much for the enlightening presentation today and all the useful tips and thoughts and perspectives on this. It's very, very helpful. I wanted to spend a couple minutes just having a bit of a conversation with Veronica, and I would invite anyone that's on the line to please share any questions or comments you have in the chat box. I'm happy to kind of incorporate those questions as well. But I know, Veronica, you and I were chatting about this in the lead up to this presentation. And one of the things that I think a lot of leaders are probably struggling with is where do we start? How do we know what good looks like for our organization? Or, how do we know where to spend our time, effort, and energy on this topic? Because there is so many different avenues that could be pursued. So I was hoping to hear maybe your thoughts and comments on that.
Yeah, because every organization is at a different stage and its own evolution, but you have to start with that is, what is this organization all about and who do we serve? And are we serving as many of those stakeholders as we possibly could? So again, going back to my example of the Band-Aids, everybody gets cuts and bruises. Why would you limit your product to just Caucasian purchasers? Why wouldn't you broaden so that every ethnicity could benefit from your product? So you as an organization need to understand who you are trying to serve and why, and start from understanding that component of your strategic direction, and sort of it's almost like a work back schedule from understanding who your stakeholders are to, okay, so if these are our stakeholders, what are we doing for them now? Where's the gap? So there's your gap analysis and understanding where you are today and where you'd like to be. And you've probably got 10 years of worth just looking at a gap analysis as simple as that.
I think the figuring out the missed opportunity, it's kind of the forest for the trees situation sometimes when people aren't, asking the right individuals for what we're missing. They just don't see it. So I know you made some great comments on that as well with regards to how you're incorporating those stakeholders in these decision-making processes. You shared a bit of a story about an organization that was serving some individuals, and I was wondering maybe you could share that with the group as well. I thought that was pretty enlightening.
Yeah. So one of my nonprofit organizations was preparing a proposal for funding, and it was for a particular country in Africa. And this team of proposal writers were all non-Africans. However, they had constituents from the country that they were actually preparing the proposal for right in their organization, and didn't think that those individuals could bring context to their proposal. And it wasn't until the proposal went to the CEO for her approval, and the individuals were inquiry was made, well, did you speak to so-and-so? And it was like deer in headlights. It's like, no, we didn't. And why not? Like, why wouldn't you believe that someone from the country that we're intending to do work in could bring context to this proposal? So again, that's a systemic approach that's embedded in that organization, that they wouldn't see that individual as, a contributor to the work that they were actually doing.
I thought that really spoke to me about how I think a lot of companies are just, have always done it a certain way and don't necessarily take that step back and think about the impact that they're missing or just not capturing.
Yeah.
So those are the couple questions I had. If anyone else has any that they'd like me to share with Veronica or phrase to the group, I'm also happy to ask those. We can use the chat box, the Q&A. Didn't see any coming up. So otherwise, with that, I think we're just about a wrap for the hour. So any final remarks, Veronica? Oh, actually, here's a question.
There's a question. Yeah.
This may be complex. What about pipeline?
Perhaps Yolanda could, if Yolanda doesn't mind to unmute, I think that question needs a little more elaboration.
Yeah, Hannah, can you do that for us? There we go.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, I don't want to derail the conversation, but it is on my mind. So I'll ask, and if this is not for today's webinar, maybe you could do another one because I really appreciate your insights. So I'm in tech and there is a conversation around pipeline as far as like, we would love to hire these people, but they're not coming out of the university. So we have to back up and start further and further behind to try and do all of this. Where does this fit into this conversation? For me, one of the biggest is women. Like there's a lot of white guys that come to the booth and there's not as many women. Well, there's almost no people of color sometimes. So it's like, and I know this is there's stuff written about it. I've read about it and it's an excuse because we've done a poor job, but you're saying it's, so what encouraged me by your conversation is that this is a long-term effort. And I would just love to hear any advice you have or even comment about this because I know it's an excuse.
And thank you for acknowledging that it is an excuse. About 7 years ago, I started work with a educational institution in Africa, African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And I used to say no job requires rocket scientists. Well, I met my rocket scientists in Africa. These youth were brilliant and they're doing math modeling for STEM that would make your mind blow. So to say that these kids don't exist is simply to say that we need to broaden our minds and thinking around where to find them. So, it's that similar as me. We look in places that we're comfortable to look in. Had you ever thought to post in Africa? Don't know. But it's a question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do we go to the same sources over and over when we have a world of resources that we can be looking at? So Yolanda, that's where we start, is expanding our sources.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because you're right. I was looking local. I was staying local. It does present some challenges for hiring people in other countries, but that's okay because that's what we're here for, is to create that. So I really appreciate that reframing of why are you limiting yourself to local? And especially now with being remote, there are things to explore. So thank you.
You're welcome. How does HR create a sense of urgency? I think that's for an HR person, no? Yes. So HR has so many tasks to do. How do we convince our CEO to spend money on diversity, inclusive, and training? Well, I think when I think about my role as a senior HR manager, my role was always, well, you had to balance between your advocacy for employees and your support to management objectives. But if I'm in tune with what my organization is there to achieve, if I know what the goals and objectives are, if I know the business of the organization that I'm serving, then there's no limit to the business case that can be developed to support diversity and inclusiveness. So we were speaking to, I won't name the organization, but certainly a prominent food deliverer in the Toronto area, and their audience is the Gen Z millennial demographic. And in speaking to her, I asked her, how do you represent these stakeholders in your organization? I said, if you're looking to grow your organization, you need to be able to demonstrate to this organization that they can see themselves in your space. And so she went back and she was able to pull the numbers to understand, who are they serving, in what postal codes, to what extent are these individuals being given the opportunity to even be considered in their organization. And she was able to build a strong enough case that the senior management team recognizes that if they're going to grow their business, they need to be talking to the people who they say they're serving. So that's a start. HR really has to be in tune with the business that they're supporting.
Veronica, we did have a question come into the Q&A, so I'll just read that for you.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for gathering, tracking, and measuring D&I metrics for organizations that haven't traditionally gathered this sort of demographic data on their workforce?
There are a few firms. I know of one in particular that is doing this. This is their business, is they track this kind of data. But most certainly in this day and age, most organizations minimally have a human resource information system. And you can build that information into your own human resource information system so that you know who you're tracking as it relates to job seekers, who you're hiring at varying levels of the organization, who you're promoting, who you're training, who you're giving particular assignments to. All of this information is not difficult for you to track internally if you have a human resource information system. But there are a couple of firms out there that this is their business, this is their bread and butter. And so those are two options. You can either embed this into your own HRIS, or you can work with a firm that will help you to create and build those analytics for your organization. Are there any other questions?
Oh, Rob, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I was going to say, I think we're just about out of time for today. So I thank you very much, Veronica, for joining us. That was a fantastic talk and a lot of great insights. And thank you for answering all these questions too. It was great. Really appreciate you joining us today. And we will send out a recording of today's call along with any follow-up questions, Q&A. Feel free to email them to us and we'll make sure we get back to you. Thanks a lot.
All right.